Hey everyone, welcome to the information session, Meet the Faculty for the Master of Arts in International Community Development Program. I'm Lisa San Martin, the Director of Student Services for this program, and I'll be here in the background helping to answer questions, especially in the end. And I want to introduce you to Brian Humphreys, who is our Program Director, and he'll be guiding us today through some information about the program, which I'm sure everyone will find very interesting. And Dr. Forrest Inslee, who founded this program about 15 years ago, I want to say, you can correct me on the exact details of that. And we'll also be sharing about that and about himself. And both of them actually are those who advise students as they go through the process of deciding what to do for their integrative project. So I'm sure you'll want to get to know them and everything they care about. So with no further ado, take it from here, Brian.
Thank you, Lisa. I'll talk a little bit about my answers to these questions in a minute, but we're going to start out asking Forrest about his history with the program and some of the values. So Forrest, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Would you tell us a little bit about the story of the program, your interests that led to it, and some of the values that drive us?
Sure, thanks, Brian. My impetus for starting this program really comes out of my work doing community development overseas, particularly some years I spent in Istanbul. And I think one thing I noticed a lot, since I was there long term, I was seeing a lot of the shorter term investments that people outside of Turkey were making in terms of relief and development, and wasn't always comfortable with what I saw. My other advantage to this perspective I had at the time was that I was actually working for a Turkish church. So I was under Turkish leadership and wasn't really having to carry the agenda of a foreign organization. So in a lot of ways, I was able to see what work foreigners were doing that through Turkish eyes, really through a Turkish perspective. Sorry about that noise in the background. It's construction upstairs. So when I came home, Northwest asked me to start a master's program, and I knew right away that what I would love to have students study would be ways to do community development, do relief work cross-culturally, in ways that were more respectful than what I had seen or experienced in my own Turkish context of work. And so really I came back with questions and spent a good year just surveying and interviewing people from different nonprofits to ask them what they actually need in terms of equipped workers, right? Like what could we do for our training program, for our master's degree that would actually make them ideal candidates for positions in nonprofits. And so based on what we heard from them and based on what I'd observed in Turkey, we started the on-campus version of international community development. And from the get-go, we realized that some people had very domestic interests and wanted to work, say, with churches or with homeless shelters, et cetera, in the States, and others had interests that would take them overseas to different countries. And so from the very start, the program was really reflective of those two different contexts. Is that a good start?
Yeah, thanks. And what are some of your current interests and projects and obsessions that are notorious?
Yeah, right now, I'm exploring something that's kind of a frontier for me. Some of the students over the years have had an environmental interest and have wanted to look at the intersection of how environment and earth care issues interact with human-focused community development. And what we've all noticed is that community development by its nature is very much focused on the problems of people and human communities. the thing that's challenging for me, and I think it's an emerging direction in community development, is to see that the community of creation is the context for community development. That community goes way beyond people and includes place, it includes ecology, it includes the beings around us. And so as someone who really is interested in earth care, I'm also asking the question, how can we be community developers using community in the broadest sense of the term, the community of our places? Because I think that, you know, cultures are shaped by their environments. And of course, human society impacts environment as well. And so attention to that particular dynamic is something that is really fascinating to me right now.
You've done a lot of interviews and involved a lot of things. There are a couple of concrete examples of where that rubber hits the road you can think of?
For the environment issues? Yeah, I remember one of our students for her field work actually studied relief work and began to understand that when, say, an organization would go into Haiti after an earthquake, they would go ready to deliver a lot of services and a lot of products and a lot of resources. But after they left, after much of the work was done, they would leave basically mountains of trash, because when you're doing emergency work, a lot of the food is packaged, you know, the water comes in plastic bottles. You're not thinking about, you know, saving on, you know, you're not thinking about avoiding wasting resources, because the focus is so much on the immediate needs of people, which of course is a good thing, right? I mean, who's going to criticize that? But her point was, maybe we ought to rethink relief work in a way that actually prioritizes both the environment and the people, and pays attention to what comes after the investment and the relief work. And maybe next time we can prepare better to deliver good services and resources in ways that aren't environmentally destructive. I just thought it was a really interesting question. And she really didn't find a lot of people in community development, especially relief and development, that were asking that question. So I lauded her for having the courage to really to ask that question. It was maybe 6 years ago when she did that. And I think she was really at the cutting edge in a lot of ways.
That's an interesting example. As someone who, I moved to the Dominican Republic in 2010, just a few months after the earthquake happened, as a million Haitians were crossing over the border to our side of the island. And there was a lot of, you're not here to do what they did over there, are you? I'm like, no, this is much longer term, relational components. Which reminds me, would you share with us kind of the 3 C's, the values of the program, how they come about, especially kind of tell us what co-empowerment is?
Sure. All of us talk about the values of the ICD program in 3 terms that happen to start with C: collaboration, co-empowerment, and contextualization. Co-empowerment is a word that we made up because there was a dynamic that we wanted to describe that the word empowerment wasn't quite fitting. Empowerment is a great word, but it really does have a power dynamic that's built into it. Empower means someone has power that they give to someone else, right? And so it's kind of a top-down, unequal relationship. But in ICD, we teach that you are partners with the people that you are there to ostensibly serve and help. There isn't a top-down relationship, that we need to work more for a collaborative kind of effort. So co-empowerment means sharing power. You know, I might, coming into a situation, have some resources and some expertise in, say, clean water. But if I don't know the culture context, if I don't understand what local wisdom already knows about those things, that chances are my interventions are going to be perhaps irrelevant, perhaps unsustainable for the long term. So unless I work with people, alongside people, valuing what they have to give to the social equation, then probably my efforts will not be as effective as they could. So that's why we use co-empowerment. Collaboration we use, it's similar to co-empowerment, but when we talk about collaboration is we really push the idea that, no organization in a given context of need operates independently. Unfortunately, many do, and they try to. And so there tends to be a competitiveness between organizations. And collaboration means just understanding that different organizations represent different strengths. And unless we kind of surrender to one another's strengths and trust to one another's strengths, then we're going to be wasting resources and repeating efforts. So collaboration really looks at the systemic nature of development work and tries to promote more of a sharing of the efforts, a sharing of the resources that really depends on trust and to some extent vulnerability. And then contextualization simply means that we can't go into any context of need assuming that we know what the answers are until we understand what the context is. We need to understand that certain things work in some contexts that won't work in other contexts. And so to pay attention to context means to take the time to listen, to take the time to watch and learn, to move slowly so that we operate then with a sense of familiarity with what's going on around us. And we can then adapt and create solutions and interventions that actually make sense to that place and to that people. But, it's not always convenient to do that. It takes time to contextualize. It takes some humility to understand that we just don't know everything we can know about a context that's not our own. So contextualization in the ICD program recommends that we learn to listen, learn to observe, learn to be learners at the outset before we offer anything that we have in terms of expertise or resources.
I love the co-empowerment example as well. As someone who did development work in a Spanish-speaking country, we always lamented that a word we used was capacitar, which is obviously means related to capacity and has to do with building the capacity of, but it has that connotation. We always explain it as, well, capacitar is giving someone the resources and the training to do good work, but also giving them the autonomy and authority and voice to be able to use those tools and resources the way they want to. We always lamented there was not an English equivalent to that word. You have to combine a bunch of words, and empowerment gets us a lot closer. So I'll answer those questions for myself. I think my trail to the ICD program mirrors your process of building it. And I got my undergrad in international relations with an emphasis in aviation relief and development. I was getting my private pilot's license and learning airplane maintenance while doing international relations studying, and then spending a couple summers with Mission Aviation Fellowship down in southern Mexico. Kind of came to realize, the aviation work, the physical relief and development work is fantastic, but being out in the field made me realize, boy, the real work that needs to be done out here is not physical, it's intercultural, and it has to do with trust, especially between cultures and how development workers go into communities. So I took off the aviation part of my undergrad and just emphasized the international relations component. Was doing nonprofit work for a couple of years, trying to figure out how I was going to adjust to this new mindset. And then I ended up being in the very first cohort, ICD cohort, back in 2008, back when it was an accelerated training program. So then I graduated in 2009. And then immediately my wife and I moved to the Dominican Republic, where I was an economic development specialist, doing a bunch of projects, primarily a youth entrepreneurship initiative, training people in rural communities to be running business plans. And then I was raising money from Dominican organizations to get businesses funded in those communities where people were writing business plans. And then I also partnered with Kraft Foods on a big project to reinforce the cacao industry in the mountains, where the farmers were all aging out of that industry and the young people were all moving into the cities, and they were trying to pay for and fund long-term development projects to keep youth in the mountain communities and be invested in the cacao industry. So I loved, fantastic project, awesome work. But it also came to realize, boy, we're doing a great job out here and we're training a lot of leaders to take up this work. Meanwhile, I'm seeing a lot of the same issues that I came out here to address in my own backyard back home. And so we came back to state of Washington to start our family, and I've been doing development work here domestically for the past 8-9 years. And I largely, so I won't bother to list all of the insane projects I've worked on in the past 8 years, but some of the highlights have been a lot of funding work, a lot of grassroots work. Most of my projects are complex inter-sector projects to address complex challenges. So I make sure that the economic development and education and grassroots and faith-based and public sectors are all working together to address the same problem. And so started a nonprofit I'm currently still working with that builds trust among at-risk fathers, and then we deliver the services they tell us they need in a high trust environment, culturally appropriate environment. Done all kinds of financial coaching projects, partnered with a credit union and built some financial products that were only available if you were meeting with a financial coach. That I worked with a nonprofit to come up with a training program, and we hired and trained financial coaches and embedded them throughout the community. Have built all kinds of workforce development programs, trying to connect build a pipeline from low-income communities to living wage jobs, leveraging people in the community, the training providers, the funders, the private sector, and the businesses themselves. That's a lot of the work that I've been doing. A lot of my focus in the last few years has been on children and families, thinking a lot about adverse childhood experiences, looking at a lot of the challenges with some men, but largely women coming out of trafficking and domestic violence programs, and looking at what it takes to help people coming out of a domestic violence program thrive and not end up in a situation when they go back into it. So been really blessed to do a lot of projects over the last few years. And then I've been adjunct for the program had been adjunct for 6 years. And then Forrest has stepped down as the director last year and is doing a bunch of other projects, but is still with us, thankfully, as the online faculty especially for the thesis and integrated project classes. And then I've been full-time faculty and director for the past year, although I still keep a foot in the development world in Tacoma, where I live, because I love doing development work, and I will keep doing it. So some of my areas of interest and expertise have become the economic side of things, whether it's adverse childhood experiences or women coming out of domestic violence or addressing homelessness. The common denominator for all those strategies is at some point a living wage job, which has become the question I think about a lot is, do we have enough living wage jobs so that we can mitigate some of these challenges? And also, if we do address the mental health and trauma and all the other issues that happen, if we can address those things, can we keep them from happening to somebody again by helping them become independent with living wage jobs? So what are we doing to make sure that people are getting living wage jobs? And we're doing a lot of training that lead to minimum wage jobs, and I look at those programs and try to make sure we're getting them living wage jobs. And realistically, $25, $30 an hour is what I'm looking for people in the community. I also think a lot about the trust and collaboration of the work that we're doing, which has to do a lot of my work, especially working with cities the last couple of years, is realizing a lot of us are actually concerned about the same problems, and we actually want the same things, but we use entirely different language. And that often leads us to believe that we are in conflict with one another. And so a lot of my work is actually working with different people in different sectors at different places, different socioeconomic status, and saying, okay, what language are you using? What language are you guys using? Oh, you're talking about the same thing, but you don't realize it. And so it's been a lot of that, bringing people together. And I've been like, you actually all want living wage jobs, and you all want your kids to be okay and to have a shot. You want to be able to provide and have housing and decent education and a safe community. We actually all want the same thing. We might disagree about some of the strategies. That's okay. We can have conversations about that if we can realize that we want the same thing. So a lot of my work is about that, the job side of it, the economic side of it, building trust with the communities, and making sure we have common language and coming together on some of these common issues. So that's a lot of it. And the other one that I really emphasized in the ICD program for the past year in particular is we talk a lot about social entrepreneurship and innovation. And I've emphasized that a lot, not just as a development strategy, but also in terms of ICD alumni managing their own career pathways. Like you need to be an innovator and an entrepreneur in terms of your own career pathway, just because the sector is changing. So you might be a great fit for a job today, but is the sector going to change in 5 years or 10 years? We got to think about the trajectory of our career and our skill and our passions with the needs in the community and how those are changing, and how the sector is changing, how the funding is changing. If the federal government funds things or a private foundation funds things, they're going to fund different things in different ways. They're going to want to hear different things. So we want alumni to be able to go to a private funder or to a city or to a local business owner and be able to work with those people and fund and make sure your own career pathway is funded, as well as these high impact development projects. So that is a lot of what I've been about the last decade.
I listened to actually something that strikes me. I'm reminded of the fact that you mentioned that your foot is in all these other things, even as you're teaching. And that's actually true of all the faculty. Like everyone who teaches is also doing something in the real world, in the world of, nonprofits and services internationally or domestically. So yeah, I think that's a real strength that you reminded me of by talking about your experience.
That's a great reminder. Forrest, would you talk a little bit about the integrative project and fieldwork and how all that works?
Sure. Most master's programs have a thesis of some sort, and what we try to do is de-emphasize the hyper-academic approach to thesis, and rather we talk in terms of integrative project, which has a thesis component, but it's absolutely rooted in real-world research and experience. And so in the third semester, for most people in the middle of the program, we have a fieldwork course, and we have taught people by then to do qualitative research, which essentially is a lot about observation and volunteering in order to get close to people who we can interview. And the students interview not just experts in the field, but people that that a particular organization wants to serve. So for example, this summer, we have people who are working on the East Coast of the States with an arts program for inner city youth. And so they're actually sitting in on sessions with the youth and their art instructors, asking them questions about how is this program working? How could it work better? What other programs might we create that would come out of this program? And so there's a lot of dependence or interdependence on the people that are being helped to make them kind of co-creators of solutions. So based on that summer research, then the following semester, they compile that research and do what we call the project. And the project really can be a lot of things. Some people design curriculum based on what they learned in that summer. Some people propose new programs and new initiatives for a particular organization. People have done short films before. Some people have done a series of paintings. Others have done a series of photographs. Quite often people do grant applications. So they'll write a grant as their project. So the sky's the limit. We really try to make opportunity for people to bring their strengths and interests to the integrative project in a way that makes it engaging to them, but also useful to the real world. So most people are doing work that applies to an actual context somewhere in the world. So that is what happens in the fall. We work on the project. And then in the following semester, we have more of the writing part. So you're reflecting back both on your field work in the summer and also on your project work in the fall. And you're basically reflecting on what are the sort of core values that I've picked up and expressed in my work so far. The integrative project is called integrative because our hope is that people will find it to be an opportunity to pull together a lot of the things they've learned from the program as well as from their experience, and to restate that in some form. And so some people will do what we call a comprehensive thesis, which is just 3 main sets of questions that they answer, referring back to their project and their field work, but also integrating things that they've learned in the program. So it's like writing maybe 3 10 to 12 page papers, and that is the thesis. Other people like to have more of a self-led approach, and so they can do what we call the traditional thesis. And so that could be a document of between 40 and 60 pages, which is shaped and guided by them. We don't tell them what and how to write. We do give students some recommendations of what ought to be showing up in a thesis like that, but mostly that is self-shaped and self-guided. And so that is actually the culmination of the program, is the integrative project, which includes the project part and includes the thesis part that's done over the course of 2 semesters. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple examples from just the past year that really stand out to me are, we had a recent graduate create a documentary about waste in the film industry in Georgia. We've had 2 students in the last couple of years focus on economic development in coal mining towns in West Virginia, where they're both happen to be from. We had a student, international student from Ethiopia, who we're actually working on the relationship between Ethiopian families and a local school district here in Washington. And he ended up both training the school district and also building a strong network among the Ethiopian community. He had a meeting just a few months ago where 400 people from the Ethiopian community showed up, and then he just started doing online trainings, and he had almost 5,000 people attend a webinar based on what he learned this past year. So a really cool project. We also have an alum who is executive director of an anti-trafficking organization in Belgium, and anti-trafficking is a big area of emphasis for quite a few students in recent years, obviously. And obviously it's a huge global problem, but a lot of people are not aware that Washington is actually a pretty significant hub for the trafficking industry, unfortunately. So a lot of students are trying to tackle that issue both internationally and also here locally. That organization in Belgium has become quite the fieldwork site for a lot of those students, since we have some great anti-trafficking projects that have been done and researched and thinking about how to increase the awareness of those programs while also protecting the identities and the safety of the people coming out of those programs. Making sure those usually women are also thriving and self-sustaining and are safe from the trafficking industry. So a lot of really cool, practical, pragmatic, ambitious projects coming out of the integrated project system.